At 9:15, I kissed Ronnie on the way down, and then John puckered up, and I started running for the hills. So thanks for being here, everybody. The purpose of my talk is to share with you my experience with grief from both the human side and the spiritual side, with most of the emphasis on the spiritual side, because I believe that's the part that helps us get through what we have to go through. It certainly was for me. So if I say things or talk about things that ring for you, grab onto them, make them your own. If they don't, you just kind of let them drift to the side. They may be meaningful later, or they may never be meaningful. That's fine. It's real important that we always check out and hear what fits for us. So most of my experiences are pretty typical. Friends, family members, aunts, uncles, grandparents, my mom, my dad. The big one for me was my first wife of 29 years, who was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 43 years old and passed when she was 51. And there's two sides of the coin for grief. One is the human side, one is the spiritual side. Now, on the human side, the loss is total, right? I mean, the person's not here physically. We can't speak with them with our voice. We can't hear them with our ears. But on the spiritual side, there's no loss at all, because spirit is eternal, and the spiritual relationship that we have with them goes on, whether they're physically here or not. So you kind of have these two almost extremes, if you will. And so what I did as I went through this is I tried to pull the spiritual in as much as I could to kind of help me through it. So another piece of that is, how do we see ourselves? When I was growing up, I was taught you're a human being and you have this thing that's called a soul, and it seemed to me that it was always a little tiny part of who I was, and its only mission in life is to figure out whether you're going to heaven or hell when you die, and other than that, you don't think about it too much. And that was kind of scary. I was always worried that my family members would end up in one place and I'd end up in the other. And then I'd never see them again, So my poor mom had a couple of miscarriages. And at that time, the teaching was the spirit of a miscarried baby would go to limbo, which was not a bad place, but it wasn't heaven. It was kind of in between. And she suffered terribly, thinking she would never see them. So here at Unity, there's much more emphasis on the spiritual side, on the soul that we are. Where spiritual beings have a human experience way more than we're human beings with a little bit of spirit. So how you see yourself is also how you will see your loved ones to that degree. It's a mirror. That's just kind of the way it works. Okay, so Psalm 23-4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Reverend Bob and I were talking about this. I've seen this in almost every memorial service or every funeral I ever went to. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago, and I said, Bob, is that for the person who died, or is that for us who are left behind? And he said, both. So today we're going to talk to this for those of us that are left behind. Because the person who's passed on is doing great. They're not in the shadow of anything. They're in pure light, they're in pure joy, they're in pure spirit. We're the ones that are in the shadow, because we have to deal with the feelings and emotions and all those things that come along with that. So the first part of that, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and it's kind of interesting because notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, yea, though I walk up to the valley of the shadow of death and I turn around and I go the other way, right? It doesn't say, yea, though I walk around the valley, or yea, I skip over the valley. So unfortunately, the valley is something we have to walk through. Now, the good news is when you walk through something, you come out the other side. It doesn't say that we get stuck there. And so that's what we want to do. The process for me in moving through the valley was two-part. One was to honor my feelings completely and totally. Honor the sadness, honor the pain, feel it. There's a saying, feelings buried alive never die. So we don't want to stuff them or deny them or push them aside. We want to process them, and the only way to process them that I know of is to actually feel them all the way through. And the other one was to watch my mind for resistance, thoughts of resistance. So that might look like, oh, she was too young. A mother should never be taken away from her two daughters like that. This should have never happened. God made a mistake here. All of those kinds of things are thoughts of resistance. And what resistance does is it stops our progress through the valley. When we hit resistance and we entertain it, we stop. And we're kind of stuck there until we can clear the resistance. Eckhart Tolle's really big about that in his books, Power of Now and A New Earth. And, he says acceptance is, okay, there it is, right? It doesn't mean I like it. It doesn't mean I welcome it, but there it is. And so we don't try to fight against something we can't change. So those were the two big ones for me, was feeling it all the way and avoiding resistance. Now, I had a couple resistance moments. The first Thanksgiving, she passed in September. My first wife's name was Debbie, and I call her Deb, so when I say that name, you'll know who I'm talking about. But she passed in September, so I'm getting ready for Thanksgiving. The kids are coming over to something we'd always done together. And I'm vacuuming and stuff, and the thought comes into my head, I should not have to be doing this by myself. This is not fair. And here comes all the emotion and all the pain and all that stuff. And so I did a real good job processing the emotion, but then I had to pull myself out of the resistance. The second time it happened, I was writing a letter to friends we hadn't seen in years and explaining, that she was gone and what had happened. And the thought came in, I should not have to be writing this letter, and same thing. So there was kind of a good piece on the resistance because it helped bring the emotions up, and that's okay to process them, but we don't want to stay stuck in that resistance thought. It actually kind of creates more pain. The only other thing I want to mention is, because I had an 8-year span here, diagnosis to passing, prayed every day for a miracle. She did the same, but I kind of had a feeling that this was probably not going to end well. I just didn't know the timing. I didn't know what it was going to look like. And so I had to pull myself out of what I call pre-grief. Sometimes we know things aren't going well, they're going in a certain direction, and we start grieving the person they're still here. And so I had to pull myself back. The way that I did that was to say, she's here now, don't miss it. So we want to stay present when someone is here with us. And the other one, too, I've read this in some places, that the more you hurt means the more you loved. Now, the people we love the most, it does hurt, I think, more. It did for me. But we don't want to stay there. We don't have to keep hurting to prove that we love someone. Our love for them is proof enough. So pain and love, in my way of thinking, really don't mix well. So you don't want to get caught up in that. Okay, second half of Psalm 23:4, spiritual side. I will fear no evil. To me, that means I won't be afraid of my emotions. I will not be afraid of them. I'll feel them. I'll let them run their course. It's okay. For thou art with me. Spirit is with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they support me. Rod and staff are all about, or comfort me. Rod and staff are all about support. So we have lots of spiritual support available to us. Jesus is with us. Guardian angels are with us. The spirit of our loved one is with us. They don't want us to be in pain. They want us to be able to move through that and move on. And family and friends are there to help support us as well. So to talk a little bit more about the spiritual side, I have some stories, my own stories. And before I start that, I forgot to say, the support, the spiritual support and all is with us before and after. So in the situations where we kind of see what's coming down the road, there's a lot of spiritual support that we can get for ourselves in that part of it as well. So my Uncle Red, great guy. He was a police officer up in Fall River, Massachusetts, and I remember we would visit up there, other aunts and uncles. I was born there, so there was a lot of family up there. And here I am, just a kid, and we're sitting in walks Uncle Red in his police uniform, and his gun strapped to him, and just kind of swaggering in. And it was just really cool for an 8-year-old. It was really neat. And he would start telling his stories and all that stuff, and it was just, to me, it was just fascinating. Well, he retired. He did a full career up there with the police force. He said, I need to get out of town because there's too many people here that I've put behind bars that may not stay there, and they probably don't like me too much. So he moved down here to Florida and got a house just a couple houses down from my parents in the same neighborhood. I was still in the Navy at the time. Uncle Red had a heart attack, went to Winter Park Hospital. They did all the workups and everything, said, okay, you got some damage, not too bad. My cousin, his daughter, came down with her son, so I kind of helped them through that. My parents were actually up north at the time, visiting people that lived up there. And my dad called me and said, take care of things. I said, okay. So he was due to come home. Well, he was in the shower getting ready to be discharged, and he had a second heart attack, worse than the first, and he died, and they didn't find him right away. So it was a bad situation. So I kind of became the on-site commander, if you will, and I got my cousin and her son, took care of them. He was going to be buried up in Fall River. His wife had already passed. She was buried up there. So I made arrangements with the funeral home. I did all that stuff and got all that done. And the day that the funeral was, I didn't go up for that. I decided, I'm going to go fly my glider. A lot of you know I fly gliders, something I really love to do. And so I was up flying. And it's not unusual in a glider for hawks, osprey, bald eagles to come up pretty close to you because you don't have an engine, so you don't make noise. So I'm flying. I'm kind of doing a left turn in a column of rising air. And here comes this bald eagle. No white head and tail yet. They don't get to it till they're 3 or 4 years old. Big, though. And swoops up. And I go, that's cool. So, and off it goes. About 2 minutes later, I see him coming back. So he comes back. Gets a little bit closer. I go, well, that's great. Off he goes. Third time, a couple minutes later, he comes back. This time, he's really close. So I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. I'm amazed because I'd never seen one do that 3 times. And I noticed that as his feathers were starting to turn color, they had a reddish hue. Well, my uncle's nickname was Red because of his red hair. And I looked at this eagle, and in a loud voice, and unfortunately there was no one around to hear me, I said, Red, is that you? I was amazed by what all of a sudden I was feeling a strong connection with him. And I heard him say in my mind, thanks for all your help. I'm doing great. And that bird tucked its wings and took off. So I called my mom that night, who was up there at the funeral, and I looked at my watch. It was 1 o'clock. And I called her and I said, what was happening at 1 o'clock? She goes, let me think. Funeral hadn't quite started yet. Casket was open. He didn't look good. We closed the casket at 1 o'clock. So I told her the story. And then I wrote it down for my 3 cousins. He had 3 daughters. So I wrote that down in a letter to all 3 of them and mailed it off. And it gave them, some comfort. Besides, for me, it was quite an amazing experience. So my mom, who came from a very healthy family, her parents lived in their 90s, and she comes down with cancer, and her 73 or 74 years old, out of the blue, nobody knows, but it's bad. And she ends up in Winter Park Hospital, and there used to be a hospice unit attached. So she was there for about 5 days. And she loved music, and she was in the choir at church, and she played the piano, and she sang, and she just loved music. I got the call. I went there every day, and this particular time I had come back, went to bed. At 2 a.m. the phone rang, and I knew what that was about, that she had just transitioned. So I jumped in my car, and as I'm headed there, I wasn't paying any attention to the radio. Radio comes on, song is halfway through, On the Wings of Love. And I immediately knew that was her communicating to me, it's good, things are good. And so I thought, I wonder what's coming on next. And it was the song that the band sang, I Can See Clearly Now. And the key to that song was there's a line in that song about a rainbow. And a couple days before my mom passed, she said, I hope God sends me a rainbow so I know everything's going to be okay. So that was amazing. And then my younger brother said, I hope Mom sends me cardinals so I know she's okay. So we went out and played golf a couple days before her funeral. Cardinals everywhere. We're standing on the second tee box at the Pines, and one of them came and landed on the tee box and just stared at us for probably 2 or 3 minutes. And I looked at my brother and I said, Cardinals? He goes, yep, she must be okay. So when I mentioned this 8-year period, so the medical prognosis at the beginning of that was really bad, maybe 12 months, maybe 18 months. Can't do much for you, that kind of prognosis. She did nutrition, meditation, spiritual exercise, all that stuff. So I never even stepped foot in a doctor's office over that 8-year period. So we're into that. And then it wasn't until the end that it was pretty clear that things weren't going well. And so I took care of her at home, at our home, with hospice help. They would come, but I was the primary caregiver. And a night or two before she passed, she was having a rough time. She woke up, she couldn't feel her arms or legs, she was kind of scared. She said, hold me, so I held her, and hold me tighter, so I held her tighter. Anyway, this went on for a little while. And after she calmed down, I went and sat next to her, and I said, was that about you and me being separated, the fear? And she goes, yes. And I said, well, physically, we will be separated. Our time together physically is coming to an end. There's no question about that. But our spiritual relationship goes on forever. We can never be separated spiritually. And she looked at me, she goes, yeah. I said, that's true. She said, yeah, I do. She goes, that's what the 99%'s about. And I'm confused. So I said, 99% of what? And she said, well, only 1% of us comes here. The other 99% stays in the library. And I'd read about library and pre-life planning and stuff like that, but never anything about percentages. I said, really? She said, yeah. And I said, so your 1% is going back to reunite with your 99% where my 99% is? She said, yes. And she got a big smile on her face, and she wasn't scared anymore, because she was going to get a bigger part of me than she got here. So that, to me, was an amazing experience. She had symbols that she told me about before she left: rainbow, hawks, eagles, and butterflies. I'm at the kitchen sink doing dishes. I look out the window, and there's a light rain but some sunshine mixed. She says, go outside. I say, no, I'm not going outside. It's raining. I don't want to get wet. It's quiet for 30 seconds. You need to go outside. So I knew what it was about. I knew there was a rainbow out there. Had to be. So I resisted again, and finally it was, you better go outside now or you're going to miss it. So I went out the front door of the house, and I kind of inched my way along under the overhang. It really wasn't raining that hard, and as I came around the corner of the garage, I looked around the corner, and there was this magnificent rainbow at the end of the street. And it wasn't like one of those real big arching ones. It was pretty tightly packed, but it looked really close, and the colors were just unbelievable. So I got the rainbow. And then the butterflies, every time I went out to mow the lawn, there was a butterfly on the same bush every time, and it had the same colors every time. I mowed the grass about once a week, week after week after week after week. There's the butterfly. I knew it was going to be there, got so used to it. So I'd walk out and go, yep, there it is. And it would hang around for a while. Never landed on me, but it would flit around. It was pretty cool. So I moved through the grief stuff. I think I did a pretty good job with it. I reached the point about 6 months after she had passed, and I'm thinking to myself, I think I'm ready to start dating. So I would have my conversations with her driving to work. So I asked her, I said, okay, I think I'm ready to start dating. What am I supposed to do? We'd been married for 29 years and dated a year before that, so it's 30 years. And she said, well, you probably think you need to do something, but you really don't. And I'm thinking, that does not make any sense at all. I said, I got to do something. I either go to a bar or I got to meet people. I've got to do something. I can't just sit at home and work and stuff. And she goes, I know, but just trust me, you really don't have to do anything. So, didn't understand that at all. We had that conversation multiple times. And I always got the same answer. I didn't like it much, but that was the answer that I got. So Ronnie and I, we knew each other for 10 years. Our families knew each other. And Ronnie and I taught a weekend seminar together. And we didn't think much about, a dating kind of thing. But a lot of people in the room did. And there were 2 other couples, and they got a hold of her and said, hey, we're going to take dance lessons, and we've partnered you up with so-and-so. Why don't you come with us? And so-and-so wasn't me. So she didn't like so-and-so at all. So she asked me to take dance lessons with her. And I thought, okay, do I say no right away? No, that would be rude. So I said, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Fully intending to call her up and say no. So my oldest daughter, came over to cook for me. I was eating too many TV dinners, in her opinion, so she's cooking for me. And she was one of her employees. Ronnie ran a medical office, and my daughter was working for her. And I'm sitting on the couch. She's in the kitchen. I got the phone in my hand. I'm ready to dial her number. And Lori, my daughter, says, what are you doing with the phone, Dad? I said, well, I need to call Ronnie. And she asked me to take dance lessons with her. I need to call her and tell her no, thank you. And she said, that might be fun. You ought to do that. And I said, no, I don't think so. And then the next thing she says is, have you ever thought about dating Ronnie? And I said, no. And she said, well, you really ought to think about that. And in my mind was the words, spiritual guidance, pay attention. Dialed her number. She answered the phone. I said, I'm in on the dance lessons. Sounds like a great idea. And on a separate note, have you ever thought that you might want to maybe sort of date me? And she said yes. And so we were off. And that's how that whole thing got started. And while we were engaged, I'm developing, very strong feelings for Ronnie, but I'm a little conflicted because I had a really good marriage and I love my wife very much, and I'm having these strong feelings for her, so I had to have a conversation with Deb. So I said to her, these were my words, is it okay to love Ronnie more than I loved you? And she said, well, I would hope that as you continue to grow and develop, that your capacity for love would continue to increase, beyond what it has been. So yes, it's absolutely okay. And to do anything less would be a disservice to you and a disservice to her. So I got my answer. And it was a pretty cool answer, something I could understand. So the last thing I want to share with you, we had run into in the early 90s, before the diagnosis even, this lady was in town and she would hang out at Spiral Circle and she'd go to different stores, and she had seen guardian angels her whole life, and so she would draw them for you. So Deb went and met with her, and this was the guardian angel, and she would draw it for you, and she'd tell you its name. Her name's Ariana. And so she came home, and we put her in a frame. We made a color copy and put it right above the key rack, out through the garage, laundry room, into the kitchen right there. So she was very visible to us for this whole time, this whole process. And I kind of started to develop an affinity for her, a relationship, I guess you could say, with this guardian angel. So about 2 years out, so we're 6 years into this 8-year stint, and I went to her above, nobody else was home. I went to her, I looked her right in the eyes, beautiful eyes, and I said, "Am I losing my wife?" And the answer was yes. And I kind of knew that. And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because she has something very important to do," which didn't make too much sense to me. And I said, "Why by cancer?" And she said, "Because she's too stubborn to go any other way." And I laughed. It made me chuckle because it was so true. I mean, it was so true, on the mark. So I tucked that little experience away. I never shared it with her because she was totally focused on healing and miracles, and I was too, but I just kind of had this, thing that I didn't think it was going to end up that way. The other thing I did with this angel, and I don't remember where in that 8-year process it was, I think it was before that, we had met a lady who was big into what she called angel music, and she said the angels have a particular kind of sound to their music, and she had composed a few things, and I thought that was kind of fascinating. So I play a little bit of piano. I took 1 year of lessons when I was in 9th grade, so I took the framed picture of her and I put it on our piano at home and asked her, I said, "Do you have a song?" And she said, "Yeah, I do." And I put my hands on the keyboard and this song kind of unfolded. And I don't write music. I don't read it very well either. And about 10 minutes. So I'd like to play that for you. Yeah. You just never know what Spirit has in mind. So let's close our eyes for a minute. We thank you, God, for creating us, the spirits that we are. Help us to always remember that we are eternal, that our passage through our physical experience here is temporary, but we are permanent in the truth of who we are. And so are our loved ones. The love we share with them will never die. And the spiritual relationship we have with them will always be there. Help us to remember that, and help that to be a comfort to each of us. We love you and we thank you. Amen. Thanks for listening.